Yeah, I made it.
And tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow will be fine.
It's like we're live, Ongam.
We are.
Feels like it.
No, we are, aren't we?
Oh, okay. Welcome everybody. My name is Ongama Mtimka, and we are right here at the Rise Mzansi pre-budget panel discussion. With me is the leader himself of Rise Mzansi, Honorable Mr. Songa Zazibi, and Professor Michael Sachs. And the two of them, Prof. Sachs is at WITS at the moment as an adjunct professor, having lived a very wonderful professional life at the National Treasury, in the Budget Office, as well as Chief Director, Budget DDG in the Budget Office, as well as Chief Director in the Fiscal Policy Department. Also, Mr. Zibi is the founder of Rise Mzansi. It shot up to fame in the lead up to the elections last year with a punchy punchline that said 2024 is our 1994. And he is obviously the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, the leader of Rise Mzansi, and in his previous life played a significant role in the corporate comms space, as well as associate editor of the Financial Mail and the Business Day. But today we are here about national matters, the national budget. Let me start with you, Portfolio Chair. Will we have a budget speech tomorrow?
Well, barring any surprises, and there was a surprise last time. Firstly, thank you very much, Ongama, and welcome. And good evening to you, Michael, as well. Barring any surprises, we should have a table of the budget tomorrow. What we don't know is whether, as we've heard previously, that is before the last time, the budget will sail through Parliament. I think we're likely to have intense debate following its tabling. And in that respect, it's likely to be like any other budget we've had before, but there will be a tabling of the budget tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm sure it's a nerve-wracking process. Prof, what is your sense of what your colleagues are up to at this final hour? What are they busy with? What do you think?
My colleagues at WITS, or you mean my former colleagues?
The Budget Office, your former colleagues.
I wouldn't want to, I think, speculate about that. What I would say is that I think this is clearly a moment of transition. The way that the budget process has functioned in the past clearly needs to change in some way. And that is a moment of great opportunity in a sense, but also a moment of great risk. So I think, in a sense, what plays out tomorrow and in the coming weeks and months will change, I think, the way the institutions work that make budgets in South Africa.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Prasongs. You were chief campaigners against the dominant party system, the budgeting, the political conditions for the creation of a budget in a dominant party system. We are here for the first time the budget gets postponed. What are what do you read from this politically in terms of where we are? I know that Prof. Sachs just says it signals that we are in a new political context in which budgets get made. Should we have regrets, or is this part of the process?
Ongama, one of the first things I said when we had an electoral outcome in May where there was no winner, where there was no majority party, was that the budgeting process is going to be different this time around. Because what has happened in the past, you've had only one party having all the ministers in cabinet. So you could transfer party consensus onto cabinet, onto parliament, because you had what in other jurisdictions would be a supermajority in that way, right? The president comes from the party, the finance minister, etc., etc. So those evaluations of what various policy decisions mean could be measured in the context of a single party. And with that, all the appropriation bills, the division of revenue bill, etc., throughout the year, everything the appropriations process has to do has always been done on the basis that there is a majority. And that caused two things. The first is that even within the ANC, there were MPs who sleepwalked through the process. And this became the preserve of the finance ministry and treasury and the committees that were seized with this issue, as well as a few other people from other political parties. But otherwise, it was taken as a fait accompli. I knew this would change. And it would be very important that consensus is secured generally in one way or another, so that we don't mess with the budgeting process. It appears that that hope was not realized last time. But it's important for South Africans to understand that we are in a new political terrain where you don't have a majority anymore. It's not just the budget. It can be any policy or legislative proposal that gets placed on the table, where, depending on whether the various political parties within and outside the government might decide to form themselves in different ways. But I also want to say, lastly, Ongama, this is not a crisis yet. It is undesirable, but it is not a crisis. What's important for people to understand is that while the budget has always sailed through, the constitution and legislation also envisages an active role for parliament. And I think we must not be too scared of a situation where parliament makes meaningful input into the budgeting process. What would become a crisis is a permanent deadlock, where we appear to be unable to look beyond our narrow interests. And in the end, we compromise a narrow interest because we fail to agree on a budget or secure enough votes to have a budget that we can function on in any event. And I'm hoping that we won't have that situation this time around.
Sure. I'm going to come to you after this question to Prof. Sachs, because I think one of the things you mentioned about how we read this process is that it is erroneous for us to think of it as a deadlock arising from a VAT issue, and that there's a much broader message around the budget. So I'd like to ask what that is. But Prof, you know, we are in this process that Songezo calls a role for Parliament, which had been for many a sleepwalking through the process. And now you have a Parliament that, as a result of the nature of the executive, because it's not unrelated to it, has got more teeth in the process of budget making. And the dynamics, in fact, that we're observing as far as executive and parliament relations with respect to this budget are not unique, because even they are playing out at the level of the cabinet itself. What do you think could you describe the process for us and what its complications could be? For people who are acting as technocrats and the minister and the staff within the National Treasury. In the end, the Constitution does vest significant control of budgeting and accounting processes on the Treasury by design, something that irked a lot of people because the people thought that that power was usurped by the Treasury. What do you make of that?
So I think our system of government is one in which the executive plays a very strong role. It is rooted in Westminster traditions. This is both how parliamentary kind of parliament as an institution evolved even prior to the transition, but is also in the constitution very strongly. The idea that parliament is led by an executive. And so if we were to shift to a position in which somehow the budget is no longer tabled by an executive, this would be a very fundamental departure from how government has worked in this country, at least for the last 30 years and even longer. Because what is a budget? A budget is many things to many people, but what it is, in a sense, if you don't have a budget for your policy, then the question is, do you have a policy? And you might say, well, no. So how does our tradition work? You have the State of the Nation address.
We seem to be losing
priorities.
We can hear you now.
Sorry, I lost you there for a moment. Am I back?
Yes. You seem to be back here, so please proceed.
Okay, so
let's see.
It's supposedly it's supposed.
I'm not sure whether it's from my side that we have a lag, but could you try maybe and shift a little, Prof, in terms of your connection? Bresongs, let me come to you so long. So we've got a budget that's coming up. I listened to your opening remarks at a discussion yesterday about where you met, where you were beginning to point out very interesting data about how in this last since in the last 10 years we seem to have had a ballooning debt, yet the growth in terms of the economy as well as per capita income remained stagnant. Do you think there is a way in which, in the scrambling for correcting the budget this week or this past 2 weeks, you are paying attention to how to enable growth? Do you think the powers that be are applying themselves enough to this issue?
Look, I think the powers that be are applying themselves to the question of growth. My concern, which I expressed yesterday, is that when the information about the VAT proposal was leaked, it had the effect of reducing a very important discussion about multiple macroeconomic issues into a single issue. And the question that everybody now asks me and asks every politician or representative is, do you support the VAT proposal or not? People are seemingly uninterested in anything else. Now, it's very important, and I won't speak on behalf of the Treasury because Michael used to work there and he knows this better than I do, but the Treasury has to manage multiple imperatives. Firstly, the economy fundamentally has to grow in order for us to generate better revenue, to take care of South Africans, expand the social wage or sustain it, etc., etc. So the Treasury has to put instruments in place which are supported by government and other stakeholders in order for the economy to grow. It has to think about those things in terms of what the tax rate is, income tax, corporate income tax, etc., etc., so that there is always a balance that enables further investment into the economy. So they have to consider that as a reality. Secondly, we've got certain social pressures which come partly out of an economy that is not growing sufficiently, or is hardly growing, basically, and is not able to lift the required number of South Africans out of poverty. And so we've got to look after people. And it is in these two, and finding the balance between these two, that we have to make some tough decisions. The concern I have, not with public discussion in particular, but with politicians like myself, is that it appears that nobody wants to make the choices about what needs to be done and to what end and where the point of balance is going to be. Our job is to try and work through the noise and work out what the most important choices are, and that when we make those choices, they are the right choices, and we don't create unnecessary risks for the whole economy and for our financial situation. But at the same time, we look after people and we invest in the economy so that the economy can continue to grow. So there are all of these imperatives. For me, it's a sensitive process that needs to be approached with a degree of maturity, notwithstanding our narrow political interests and what they may be. The risk with what we have right now, and I am in some of the conversations, that I do not have the confidence that there are enough political actors who are willing to take a balanced view and try and do the right thing by everybody else. It is an opportunity for some kind of feeding frenzy for me, where you get to criticize again and again and again. And I'm hoping that when, once the budget is tabled tomorrow, all of us will engage with the process in such a way that within the allocated, I think, the 35-day period, we can have a resolution in Parliament where there is a budget. The budget is still within the fiscal framework. We don't take any reckless decisions. And we're quite clear in our communication about what we're choosing to prioritize now or later and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Just a reminder, we are in a live Rise Mzansi pre-budget panel discussion. With me is the chair of SCOPA, Mr. Songezo Zibe, and the adjunct professor at Wits, Professor Michael Sachs. Two questions for you, Prof. By the way, to you who is joining via all the social media platforms, you're welcome. Thank you. And if you want to participate in the discussion, keep dropping your comments on the relevant comment sections. We'll pick up a few of them at about 7:10. So please stay tuned with us. Prof, two questions for you. Come the 1st of April, because we have had these delays, is it a situation like in the US where departments cannot spend at all? Then the second question, why must we choose? People keep mentioning this point that why must a government worry about debt for a currency that it issues? This is not my own words. But why must we choose? Why must we make this, these choices that Mr. Zibe is talking about? Two questions.
Okay, that one's the easiest one. If you can tell me that you are capable as a government authority of controlling the value of the rand, you would need to explain how are you going to set, because the value of the rand is set in international markets relative to the value of the dollar. So we exist in, not all currencies are equal. So it may be that the US prints its own currency and is also able to entirely finance its own debt. Our currency is subject to the vagaries of global capital markets. So if we wanted to, for instance, have more, I suppose, autonomy like the US has, if we wanted to build monetary sovereignty, if that was a goal of government, for instance, then we should discuss reforms to capital market regulation, right? Because in the current structure of how institutions are structured in South Africa, you can't just ignore that and expect a policy to work. You would have to do a set of reforms to move in that direction. So it's not as simple as simply saying it's a currency. Yes, you print the currency. The government supplies the currency, but at the heart of this sovereign debt is a relationship between government, the sovereign, and wealth holders in South Africa. That's at the heart of the relationship, because the debt is largely domestic, right? So now the wealth holders also have options in terms of dollar options, let's say. Although to a large extent they're held inside the country by regulation. So there's a lot to discuss about that, but you can't simply announce in a budget that we don't consider debt to be a problem. You've got to present a budget that makes sense. In terms of if there's a danger of government closing down, no, there isn't. In fact, I think probably what we need to realize tonight is that my expectation is that tomorrow's budget will only resolve half of the budget problems. And the other half will be resolved in the adjustment budget in October. That is the likely outcome. That's what I would do anyway. That's what I would try and do, because in any case, the budget proposal that was not tabled on the 19th of February, almost all the additions to spending were marked as provisional allocations, meaning that the intention was not to pass a budget with all of those spending, because the budget is the law that Parliament passes. The intention was to just prepare the nation that we may have to budget with for these things in October. So we're moving with, and this is kind of the institutional dynamic. When our budget system was set up, it was very consciously set up as one that would be able to plan over the medium term, so that departments and the executive again would be able to deliver on its obligations. And we've moved now to a situation where really we're budgeting for the next 6 months. And even that, there's a great deal of uncertainty about what will happen next. But I think the important point is that, of course, these things are happening in real time and people are making their choices, are placing their bets. But at the end of the day, the budget is a continuous process. There's a budget today, there's a budget in 6 months, there's budget execution, and there will be a budget next year. So there can be no substitute for an executive that has a program. And part of that program is agreement on what is the fiscal basis of that program. An executive that claims to have a policy program but can't agree on the fiscal basis of that program, in my view, doesn't have a program, and in my view, doesn't really constitute a government. It is fine. There are people occupying cabinet positions, but what you would move towards then is a kind of really fundamental erosion of the capacity of the executive to define the direction for the country on a whole bunch of levels. I think it's good that there are opportunities for greater democratic deliberation, and that includes a stronger role for Parliament in the budget. But as I say, these things, there's a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of risks.
Yeah, so very interesting idea around fiscal autonomy or monetary autonomy. And I think you raised something here which systems theorists would agree strongly with you, that the conduct of fiscal policies against a system of other monetary institutions, be they investors or stock markets or currency markets that are playing in the space. It's almost as though you're saying to me, there's nothing fundamentally wrong per se about raising something about monetary sovereignty, but or the space that our government has to actually make self-determined policy directives as far as fiscal policy is concerned. But you are saying what we have in terms of other institutions and the regulatory framework that governs them is it places limitations on what government can or cannot do. Prashangs, what's your thought on that?
No, Michael's absolutely correct. I think there is a belief, and I think we see this with Donald Trump in the United States, where we believe it's possible to be insular and make your own decisions entirely, and that nobody elsewhere, either in the world or within your own country, is going to respond to the decisions that you take. So we have, for instance, President Donald Trump saying that he's going to impose tariffs because he wants to boost US manufacturing, and you find that the Canadians can respond, the Mexicans can respond, the Chinese can respond, and so on, and you've got significant domestic problems. I think it is really important for South Africans to understand that all countries, but South Africa in particular, because of our trade links, we are really deeply connected to other countries' financial systems, monetary policy decisions, and so on. Right? So it's really important that whenever we make policy decisions within South Africa, macroeconomic policy decisions, and even all the way into the budget, we keep that in mind. Because if we don't, we are going to harm ourselves as soon as other parties, other actors respond. If you were to take, for instance, the large companies in South Africa, you take the banks, for example, a significant amount of their holdings, in fact, I think closer to above 50%, are foreign investors. They come from Europe, it's pension funds from Europe, from North America, etc., 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 all over the world, right? if we took a decision that they felt was risky into their investments, they would move that money. And believe me, it's not complicated. It doesn't take long. It sparks a sell-off of bank shares in South Africa. And that event alone has got an impact on the value of the rand, which is what Michael was talking about earlier. We've taken our own policy decision. Fine, they will take their own decision too. And that decision has got an impact on our economic realities here at home. So it's important to keep this balance. And I completely agree with Michael. I guess the point about this budget now, one of the things I've said, and I can share this because I've said it publicly elsewhere, I've said to the finance minister, one of the things that we may need to have in the future is where, because we've got 3-year budgeting cycles in South Africa, you look at any budget, it will tell you what's going to happen over the next 3 years. Of course, it's dynamic, it gets revised each time, but that thing they call the mini budget in October is actually really important to look at, because it makes this process here to not be a surprise, right? Most of it is not a surprise because it was said in October and we deliberated on it. I think what is really important in this moment is that we may have to look in the future at tabling 2 appropriation bills. In other words, everything that is not contested at all, we've agreed we want to fund it. We want to pay teachers, we want to do all of these kind of things. Put those in one appropriation bill and pass it, because we agree those things must happen. You have another one with a few things we disagree on, and those can be left to a debate that goes on until October, for instance. Now, that could work. I don't know whether that will work precisely or not, but the point I'm making is you also need to remove as much uncertainty as possible from the process so that people know whether X is going to happen or Y is going to happen. If in the end, the amount of money in question, you've got a budget that will be north of 2.5 trillion. What we're fighting about is what, 28 to 30 billion a year. It's like, I don't know, not point something of the budget or whatever, right? Like, it's tiny. So how about we let the majority of the budget continue and we just fight about this issue? And I know it's not that simple because there are interlinks between that and other decisions that we've got to take, but I think that's important. Last point, Ongama, we've got to confront the elephants in the room. We really have to confront the elephants in the room. I don't like talking about the money just as the money alone. The decisions we are having to take are the following. How many unemployed doctors can we afford to employ? How many teachers can we afford to employ in KZN, which needs 19,000 teachers? Is it 15,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 8,000? Let's make the decision. And somebody should own it and say, I prefer to fund the troops in the DRC because we've been humiliated by Rwanda, as one of my colleagues intimated yesterday. But we choose to do less of something else. My problem is none of us as political office bearers want to make any choices. We want Father Christmas to come and present all the goodies, and we walk away and we don't spend our own political capital on the tough choices that have got to be made. So we keep kicking the can down the road. And I think if Parliament wants the level of influence that people are saying Parliament should have, then we must be able to spend our political capital on these decisions and not foist everything on the finance minister when we refuse to make choices. And I think that's irresponsible.
Yeah, so coming up next is going to be your top 3 expectations from each of you. And then we are going to take some questions and comments from the viewers and whoever is listening to this program at the moment. But I think what you've sufficiently described what my standard 6 economics teacher said is a problem of economics: unlimited wants and limited resources, basic economics. Now, also, I do want to, explain this concept of how when you exist in a system, systems theorists have told us that, and I've heard you describe this, that systems have got this feature of being autonomous entities in their own right, which are wholes in their own right, but only a part in relation to a bigger whole. Only a part in relation to a bigger whole. And what that means is that you may think that you are autonomous enough to take certain decisions, only to find that, they've got repercussions which force you to capitulate on those decisions. And I think another concept that can be taken from chaos theory is the idea that small actions sometimes may trigger disproportionate consequences elsewhere down the road. And chaos theories makes the point that a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world, say Wuhan, for example, and I'm intentional using that example, can generate a tsunami elsewhere. And we know Wuhan recently, somebody on one day goes to a market and tends to be patient number one, or in fact exposed to a lab, whichever theory of the creation of COVID you believe. Anyway, we're coming to you in exactly 9 minutes. Please post your comments, say your questions so that we can continue. I've seen a pop-up of encouraging messages, some of them saying, great comments. This is real parliament. Keep them coming. Let me start with you, Michael. Your top 3 expectations from the budget. If the minister doesn't say anything, what are the top 3 things that you would have him say?
Well, I think there's my expectations and what I would prefer to happen. But I suppose my expectations is that, first of all, as I said, there will be many issues that are unresolved tomorrow. And the ones that it is possible to resolve, I hope they are resolved. And I hope they are resolved in cabinet, because I think the alternative is taking us down a very dangerous path, or a risky path. And I think in terms of the issues that are resolved, we need to look at the most important spending lines. So Songezo was talking earlier about not facing up to trade-offs. And I was going to say so Parliament passes a law called the Basic Laws Amendment Act. And there was a lot of debate about the language language policy implications of that act. But at the time, almost no debate whatsoever about the cost of expanding grade R, making grade R a compulsory and universal subject. Now, there are very good arguments to be had about why we should make grade R a compulsory and universal subject, but it still could not be funded within the fiscal framework. So it means that there's a fundamental disconnect between the people who are making the policy and the people who are making the budgets. And so now we're left, in a sense, with the mess, because we need to now finance this increase in teachers or withdraw from that commitment. And so I hope things like that are going to be financed and settled tomorrow. And I hope that the tax burden that arises as a result, firstly, is acknowledged, because there's also a very strong push in this debate to kick for touch, to not take the decisions by drawing down on elements of the government's balance sheet, such as the GPF or the Reserve Bank or some such, the UIF. There are many candidates, and it's true that government does have these balances that it potentially has access to. But this is not, we should not see this as a problem only of today. This problem has been building up for many years, of policies being added onto the budget that are permanent policies, right? When you when you extend grade R to all 5-year-olds and say it's compulsory for them to attend, and we're going to provide that class, this is a permanent commitment. If you start running down the UIF to finance it, you are postponing the day when you have to raise the taxes. And that when that day comes, you now no longer have the asset that you used to have. So my kind of expectation for tomorrow, I suppose, is that first, some kind of moderate solution is found on both the spending and the tax side that can fly politically. Second, that the things that can't be solved now are solved in future. And I forgot the third one, but there you go.
Wow, thank you so much, and also thanks for touching on that elements of the government balance sheet. By the way, you do know, Prof, that we can teach them a thing or two about consent budgets sitting at Senate. What you were talking about, Brasongs, where some things get to be on a consent agenda. This is what university senates do. But an opportunity is still given for somebody, if they want to move what's already on the consent agenda from that consent agenda to the main agenda. But I think it's a brilliant thing which we in universities do. Yeah, your three expectations, Brasongs?
So my expectations are different, and I'm trying to mix them up because obviously I am involved in the process. So in about 25 minutes time, I'm supposed to be in a meeting about the budget itself, right?
Let us in on the secrets.
No. but the point. So I've got three hopes. Let me say hopes, right? I've got three hopes. The first is that we will have a general consensus within cabinet and by extension within the parties involved in the GNU on a set of proposals that can be placed before Parliament that are within the fiscal framework, first of all, and secondly, provide a good basis for Parliament to do its work and appropriate whatever funds need to be appropriated in order for us to do the work of the South African people. So that is the first thing that I'm hoping for. The second thing is that I am hoping that we can strike a balance in the budget between the social wage, firstly, secondly, fiscal responsibility, and thirdly, leaving enough room for investment in the economy itself by the government, by government entities and agencies, and by commercial entities, that is the private sector, so that we can continue to have jobs. One of the things all of us, I think we must avoid is wanting to shift the burden of responsibility onto one set of stakeholders. Let me give you an example about the development of my own thinking as I've participated in this process. For instance, one of the big expenditure items over the next 3 years is the public sector wage agreement. It was not in place in October, I think, when the medium-term budget policy statement was put forward. It's a significant amount of money. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe we can tinker with that and go back and talk to the unions and say, hey, listen, let's continue talking some more. We can implement it later, but maybe we can delay the salary increase or have a different number, for an example. There are some proposals that say they should be pay a holiday by the government in terms of pension fund contributions and so on, because we've got enough in the kitty and that kind of thing. But then I think to myself, you also don't want only one set of stakeholders to carry the burden. So you're asking public servants not to take a salary increase. And then you also say, I'm going to dip into your pensions in order to solve a problem for everybody. So what I'm trying to say is, even as we consider the solutions, I'm hoping that they'll be balanced in the sense that you don't ask public servants to carry only the burden of responsibility, for instance, morally at least, or you say you want a 7%, 8%, 9%, 7% increase in company income taxes, which you could do, but I don't think there are many companies with a net profit margin of 7%, of 10, 11%, where they've got 7% to give, and therefore they won't retrench after. So what I'm trying to say is my third hope is that we will have this balance. And finally, if there is VAT on the table, it must be accompanied by measures such as the expansion of the zero-rated items, and that needs to be thought of creatively. Secondly, for people that earn below a certain band of income, the finance minister must consider or must propose that the burden of income tax on those people is relaxed, and maybe a range of other measures. But because what you don't want, as I said, is only the poor to bear the burden, only the public servants to bear the burden. If you can achieve that balance, I might be very happy.
I'll accept that your number 2 and 3 are really hopes. Number 1? Come
Oh,
on,
sorry.
it has to
My
be an
number one.
expectation. Your number one has to be an expectation at this point.
Can I say? So my number one
Yeah.
is that we don't reduce the investment in healthcare, in doctors and nurses. Listen, we can't play with that stuff, right? So that's really important. Doctors and nurses and teachers. I went on oversight last year. We rode a train from Naledi to Park Station, a PRASA train. It took us an hour, 25 minutes. If they have the signaling equipment and the pairways are solid enough so that the trains can run, that trip can take 35 minutes. If you take a taxi, same distance, 60 Rand return per day. If you take a train, it's less than 30 Rand. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, I'm hoping that the things that are going to make the lives of South Africans better are supported in this budget. But I also, like I said, I understand that it has to be done in a way that doesn't place a burden just on one set of stakeholders.
Sure. There you have it. Colleagues, family, comrades, South Africans. We're coming to you now, and I hear it's fireworks there by the comments. Let's read a few of those comments. We're going to read them as they come up on my screen. It's exciting times. Remember, we're continuing up until shortly. We've got Tumelo Mpakanyane. The songs. How do we get out of the habit of lending money to spend on operational expenditure, while also keeping critical government priorities funded? How do we get out of this cycle, given the trillions we've wasted?
Can I take this question to the finance minister and ask him to answer it? And then,
yeah. Sure.
No, you know what? I mean, I made some. This is going to take some time, right? Because I think we do politically, and I'm speaking as a political actor when I say we do. So I'm including myself in that group. That we are generally not mindful of whether we invest sufficiently in the economy and in the right way, but also that the underpinnings thereof are important. One of the things I think we should try and do is to make some decisions about who can invest in public goods in South Africa. I believe, for instance, one of the ways in which we can have an impact on economic growth is to faster, because the government has now taken this decision, to say we're going to treat rail like we treat the National Road Network. The government does not actually have to operate trains, but we will own the system, license, regulate, make sure they're safe and so on. And the actors within that system can find each other so that goods can move within and between South Africa and the ports and that kind of thing, because it is a significant hurdle on the South African economy. So sometimes the biggest hurdle is here, where we think, no, you shouldn't do X. Well, we don't have the money. We've borrowed a lot of money and we've wasted it. So I think that's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is I think that we really need to look at municipalities again. I think municipalities are hell of inefficient. We talk about the public sector wage bill. Man, you got to look at municipalities as well. Whether the structures they've adopted served the purpose for which it is intended, and how much they spend on their own overheads versus service delivery, servicing businesses, small enterprises, large enterprises, and so on. So the structural reforms are going to take time, and they need some political restructuring in order for them to work.
Yeah, thank you. I've got one here from veteran economic journalist, among many other things, Peter Bruce. The first version of this question seems to have vanished. What can the finance minister do tomorrow to meaningfully target fast economic growth? What would ordinary mortals like me have to look for? Let me take that to you, Prof. Sachs.
I think the honest answer is not a lot. There's not a lot that can be delivered in the budget tomorrow that is going to make a huge difference to economic growth. I think the idea that the budget somehow defines the path of economic growth belongs to a bygone era where the finance minister defined economic and social policy for the whole of government. And so when the finance minister got up on budget day to table his budget or her budget, or as it happens, it's all been men, people would look to that for an indication of how the whole of government is going to move in the next few years. But in the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I think in particular, but going back really over a decade and more, the Minister of Finance has lost that authority. And so the direction of economic growth is not, it's determined also by the Minister of Electricity and the Minister of Transport and a whole range of the Minister of Trade and Industry. And so what is the Minister of Finance? What tools is he left with? Well, it's just taxing and spending, really, and borrowing or structuring. And in broad terms, those are not the levers that you can pull at this moment to accelerate economic growth. You can put some rhetoric on the table, certainly, and some kind of vision, or as they say, a growth story. But it will really be just a story rather than a compelling plan to raise economic growth. Because what is needed to raise economic growth is a clear, compelling, and united, a clear and compelling plan from a united cabinet. That is what is required to accelerate economic growth. And as others have said, it's kind of not looking like we're going to get that tomorrow.
Wow, very interesting, especially around this idea of results-driven leadership. I think you're making the point about a much broader, expectation from the public sector itself, from a leadership point of view, and not expecting miracles from the finance minister. Theo Jonker is asking, wasteful and unnecessary expenditure, why isn't that nipped in the bud? It's escalating every year, and who better to ask than the chairperson of Scopa?
So one of the things I'd like to, I'm glad about this question, by the way, because wasteful and unnecessary expenditure often has to do with two things. One is the quality of the politicians and therefore the quality of the public servants they choose to employ. And secondly, the political culture that you have in that institutions or in a whole range of political institutions. What does that mean? That means when you have politicians who are inherently incapable of managing the strategic importance of the municipality they have, for instance, and I'll make one example just now. They're going to hire a bad municipal manager who proceeds to hire bad executive directors together with the council. They continue to make bad decisions with a part of the equitable share and what they get from residents. We must not, therefore, underestimate the strategic importance to wasteful and unnecessary expenditure. What the president said in the State of the Nation address about having a capable and ethical state, because you can change the culture and approach to government expenditure to begin with, because you've got better quality people and that kind of thing. So that is one as an example. It's a long-term problem. Let me talk about what we are doing as Scopa, for instance. Apart from the Auditor General's reports, we are now asking the worst offenders to file quarterly reports to the committee. They don't come once a year. We see them twice a year, and we want to see progress. We do live audits together with the Auditor General to see whether the audit outcomes that they're supposed to do something about are being attended to. So that is the second thing. The third thing, which I'm really excited about, is that the National Treasury is going to come to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts and provide us with a detailed summary of their expenditure reviews to see where the government is spending inefficiently. For example, the Northern Cape has more cars per public servant than Gauteng does, per number of public servants than Gauteng does. That might be justified or not. The government overpays.
These are cars that the state buys on their behalf?
Yeah. No. These are cars belonging to the government. So the Northern Cape is a disproportionately
It's a big province, huh?
Yeah. No, I know it's a big province. All I'm saying is you kind of need to look at those things and ask whether it is justifiable or not. Secondly, the government overpays for rental space, office space. In some places, they pay 45% more. You got to look at that and say, hang on, what is an acceptable premium on market rates? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? If it's 125%, you're not doing it right. You can redirect that money, put it back into service delivery. You're not taking it away completely. And I am determined that we are going to place that on the program of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, because we can start asking ministers and mayors and premiers and MECs to drive different behavior in their departments and in their entities so that we start using money better.
Yeah, so very interesting points about the bad faith practices, hiring in bad faith, which trickles down throughout the entire institution. And that is something done deliberately to cripple state capacity, because if you hire competent people, chances that they are going to take instructions that are unlawful and that are limiting for their careers are going to be limited. Now, Lulamile is asking, has there ever been any analysis of the public sector wage bill to ascertain what percentage of this is attributed to claims by managers from level 10 upwards? Prof. Sachs?
The answer is yes. And I have written a paper on that myself, and Treasury has put quite a lot of analysis in the last few years in the MTBPS of exactly these questions. And to answer, it's about 7% of the wage bill of government is attributable to senior management, level 10 and above. And of course, that's a significant share, 7%. But the other fact to put on the table is that cohort of public sector managers, or at least those who are above level 12, have not had a real pay increase for about 15 years. In other words, their pay has declined quite consistently relative to inflation over the last 15 years. So because when government faces a pressure on the wage bill, of course, part of the wage bill is bargained with labor, and that can't really be adjusted unless it is, but in the context of a budget, it's very difficult. So government tends to resort, in order to contain the wage bill, to those parts of the wage bill that go to people who don't have negotiating power. And there are two elements of those. It's mainly magistrates and senior management services. So both of those cohorts of public servants have seen their pay significantly decline consistently over the last 15 years.
Just to follow up, do we have something, not to create a false dichotomy, but do we have something like frontline versus support, or core functions versus support? Are you able to talk about that picture?
So it's hard to, but I looked at the Persal data, and the truth is, I don't agree with characterizations of public sector salary bill as somehow bloated or something like that, because if you look at it, the salary bill is dominated by people who are doctors, nurses, teachers, and police officers. And when you look at the kind of, say, within those sectors, within the basic education sector, it's very, I don't think anyone can say there's an imbalance between, there's too many people being employed in the back office and not enough frontline teachers. In fact, many people argue that we need to strengthen the district administration of education, and that's a critical kind of reform that is needed. So we have a large public sector wage bill because our state provides extensive services, and those services are criminal justice and the police, healthcare, and basic education. And in any large organization or large bureaucracy, there is certainly waste, and there is certainly waste that could be found in the wage bill. But the basic dynamics that need to be confronted are how many teachers, nurses, and police officers we want to employ, and how much do we want to pay those people?
Absolutely, absolutely, Prof. I think many of us, especially in the social sciences, have been concerned about framing of the public service as bloated, but at the back of our minds have had a question as to whether as to whether there's some legitimacy to it. Let me give. Can I give Songezo one last chance to say hi, or can we consider him? He's coming up to say bye. It's been great to have you. Matters of national importance to deal with.
Yeah, I apologize that I have to go, but I think the important message that I want to leave everybody with, I think we are in an unprecedented time in terms of the balance of power within Parliament and within the government. So we've hit a bump in the road in the budgeting process. But I think one of the things we must always try and protect is the credibility of our fiscal system. It's the credibility of the treasury, it's the credibility of the way we manage the budget in South Africa and so on. And I'm hoping that whatever consensus we reach, it's going to stand for all time over the next few years so that we don't have this uncertainty. One of the advantages of our two-step budgeting process is that it offers the uncertainty to various actors, that we know what the government is going to do, we know how it's going to do it, we know how it's going to fund it, etc. And when the government says it's going to do something, it generally does it. That helps with the management of the economy, the exchange rate, investor confidence, and so on. And I think what we really must do, and I'm talking about my colleagues now in the political realm, we must work very hard to protect the credibility of our fiscal system and the way that we present and pass budget.
Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and in fact, our host today. Thank you. We pray for wisdom and understanding as you go into those proceedings. We continue. We continue until we have no questions, or 8, whichever comes first. Can we not have a system where holders of SASSA cards don't pay VAT if they present card tellers, and increase VAT a little for the rest of us? That's a question from Saripotha.
Well, I think that wouldn't be the right way to think about it, because if we want taxes to, as far as possible, to be broadly based for everyone to pay the same tax. If we feel that holders of SASSA cards need a top up to afford these higher prices, it makes more sense to put it on the SASSA card in the form of a grant. We have a system that targets those people with cash. So once you go into the VAT system and you now want to exclude certain customers from VAT or give them a rebate, it sounds like a more complicated approach than the one of simply offsetting the VAT increase with an increase in social grants, which is close to what Treasury had proposed in the non-tabled budget.
Sure. And I take it that this question from Sari is talking about the over and above zero-rated products. Tammy Mahlangabeza is saying, how is that Khaule? Well, we'll take that question now. What does the government have against zero-based budgeting? After all, departments, parastatals, and provinces keep running unspent funds.
So just to be clear, zero-based budgeting was an idea that was developed in the private sector, actually in the US, by somebody working at Hewlett-Packard. And it has been very rarely applied in the private sector and almost never applied in the public sector around the world. And the reason is kind of obvious. It's that if, let's say, you're running an education department, and so education is a cycle that repeats every year, or you go through grades, then you run matric every year. And so to start out, and 80% of your costs are in the teachers and the personnel that deliver the education or mark the exams. The rest are in textbooks. So it's possible to find waste in the education budgets. But if you're going to start your budget by assuming a zero budget and reimagine education from scratch, it's not going to be that relevant, that process, to an education department. There may be some other smaller departments where it makes a lot of sense. But if you're running a large government operation, you have continuing obligations and contracts that repeat year after year. And you need to think about how do you shift this system over several years in a particular direction, rather than asking for kind of just kind of blue sky thinking in a single year. The blue sky thinking might give you a good target for what should we do in the next 3 or 4 years to reform spending in this area and make it more efficient. Then you would need to be consistent in implementing those programs after 5 years. So the problem, in a sense, is government is also that we are not necessarily consistent in what government is aiming to achieve 1 year to the next.
Nkuli is asking, and she's acknowledging that this may have already been asked, what value, if any, would there be to South Africa Inc. in recouping the monies that were borrowed and stolen over the years?
So I suppose I'm trying to interpret this. There are monies that were borrowed, but maybe there were other monies that were stolen. I don't know if those are the same or they're separate things. I'm trying to...
So a little bit of context. I don't know if this is her context, but there was interesting, again, from comments made by Songezo yesterday, that you've got a huge borrowing with nothing to show on the ground. And I guess those things are related. And nothing to show on the ground, no growth in the economy, no growth in per capita income. So there's a senseless borrowing, as it were. So if you borrow, or if you take any form of revenue, in a sense, but I don't think borrowing is special. Also, when you're taking tax revenue out of people's pockets, or you're borrowing money, hopefully you're able, as the government, to transform that money into something that is effective in society, in changing society, and creating a basis as we grow for more revenue and cheaper borrowing in the future. And certainly we have not been doing that. We have expanded the size of the state, and that has not necessarily been wrong. Remember, we've expanded the size of the state over the last decade and a half or 20 years. It was largely an increase in healthcare, basic education, and policing and criminal justice that took place. So we now found ourselves in a position where we could no longer sustain, and that expansion itself, although those are important things, they didn't lead on their own to kind of driving, they didn't catalyze a process of growth in the economy that paid for themselves. And so we're left now with growth stagnating, which makes all of these questions so much more difficult to resolve. Yeah, and also I think, Nkuli, I remember at some point there were debates about whether some of these, whether executives should be held personally liable for some of the wasteful expenditure, or in fact even corruption that takes place under them, that results in the siphoning out of public funds. And it's understandable on the latter part in terms of, corruption. But when it came to wasteful expenditure, among other things, it seems as though there was a pushback against that, Prof.
Well, so there is a very ordered, regulated, legislated process. There's, of course, one needs to understand the difference between irregular expenditure, which just means that it means what it says. It's irregular. It's not necessarily wrong. It's that you didn't follow the proper regulations. So there are times when that happens. It happens for many different reasons. But then there's a different category, which is called fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And once an organization in the public system, fruitless and wasteful expenditure is found, there are certainly consequences that can be imposed on. Of course, it's not so easy. You have to start with the disciplinary procedure. Do we have the capacity for criminal prosecutions? These things, I'm saying the law and the regulations allow for that to happen. Whether it's happening, perhaps it's not, and we need to look at it again. But in principle, it can.
Arno van Hoft, please pardon my strong rural background English there. Can we form a new social compact that allows for greater South African private sector capital management and technical capability that can be leveraged to stabilize the situation and drive growth?
I think we can, and I think we have done so. Actually, I think in the sixth administration, even before the Government of National Unity, that's exactly what the sixth administration was pursuing, and I think it happened to quite a large extent. And the Government of National Unity does create a much stronger opportunity to strengthen and deepen that social compact that I think is really there. I think though I want to say many of the solutions to public sector problems simply cannot be resolved by the private sector, because so for instance, you've got to have effective regulation of electricity prices, and that's a public regulation problem. And certainly we have to have the right people in the right jobs, and many of the right people are in the private sector, partly because the private sector gets paid salaries at that level that are 5 or 6 times what is paid in the public sector. But what I'm saying is there's no way around building public sector, building government capability. And if the kind of approach is to say every time we hit a problem with public capability or failure of the government, we shift it to the private sector, there are some areas where that can help. I'm not denying it, but there are other areas where there's no alternative but building the capability inside the government.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Prof. So I often argue that we mustn't be dogmatic about who is most efficient, but rather make judgments based on real evidence. So one of the things, for example, especially around port concessions or rail concessions, and I'm quite happy that Prasong's is driving this idea that common user infrastructure gets retained by the state, and then you allow private players to operate where it makes sense for them to operate without giving them absolute control over what should be common user infrastructure. But the other thing is that we should watch the tendency when privatization takes place, and I'm neither against nor for, is that people would leverage the publicness of the service and not create a situation in which what the private entity derives value from is more increased business from whatever it was being done, and that puts pressure on prices rather than because now you've got a private sector that must make a profit. For me, the way to judge whether a transaction, a privatization transaction has been good, is whether as a result of it more volumes get pushed and more revenues get pushed, and the state, whatever is left with in that ownership structure, is left with at equal to where it was or greater, not smaller, as a result of a private player coming on board. Your thoughts on that?
So I think, again, there's certain, the scenario I think you have in mind is the one of infrastructure services, such as electricity, water reticulation, and passenger rail and roads and those kind of functions. And most of what government does, the vast bulk of the budget, is for what I would call decommodified provision. In other words, providing services that are free, such as free education, free healthcare, free police, free access to the courts. None of these things generate a revenue stream. And so whereas now that they are decommodified, they are not markets. These are things that are not being sold on the market. And that's the choice we've made as a country. Other choices we could discuss, even privatization there, but at the moment I'm assuming that's not on the agenda. So we're providing these services free. And on the other hand, a market, the private sector, sells you things in exchange. And the fact that you're giving somebody money in exchange for a product means there's an accountability between the buyer and the seller. If doesn't think it's worth the value, they don't have to pay it. But when you're providing things free, like education, you don't have that direct relationship of accountability with the customer. It comes through elections and parliament and all of this. So on the one hand, what I'm saying is that there are reasons why you might not expect that the public sector wouldn't be as customer oriented as the private sector. It's that they're not getting a stream of revenue out of their customers. And in a sense, change it. You can change. There's a limit to what the private sector can contribute in a situation like that. It can contribute maybe management skill, but it can't fundamentally take over the operation of the government operation. With infrastructure services, we're kind of in a middle ground where they're kind of commodities in that you pay for them directly for electricity and water and your passenger rail. There's a 30 Rand. But they're also kind of public. So in that space, there's all kinds of spaces for collaboration and interesting different ideas.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm going to take the remaining 3 in succession so that you can answer all of them at once, and then we close. First is Arno, who is saying, is there real merit in what the SARS commissioner is advocating for more funding to better collect what is owed to the fiscus? So that's one. The next one, can you show the next one, colleagues? Oluetu Maga, regarding efficient use of government funds, Prof, have you looked into AI tools such as Ukraine's Dozoro, and I hope I didn't butcher that, Dozoro, and Brazil's Alice, that in real time access all government payments and flag dodgy payments? And last but not least, Peter Bruce once again, if there is no cabinet agreement on the budget tomorrow and the finance minister presents it nonetheless, for how long can it be debated before Parliament would need to vote on it?
Okay. On the SARS commissioner, look, there's no doubt that the SARS commissioner has a very compelling case to have a larger budget. We must not take for granted this. One of the things that people talk about state failure in South Africa. When it comes to collecting taxes, we are one of the most developed countries in the world, to be honest, and in many respects even more developed than others. So, for instance, so just to give you an example, 90% of government revenue in South Africa is collected by SARS. This is unheard of, even in high-income countries, where to have such a concentration of revenue. And this has been built, it has many dimensions that have been built over many years. And we have to cultivate and develop that tax collecting capability. We can't let it slide. And certainly if we invest in tax paying capability, we would expect to broaden the tax net and get additional revenue. However, you can't say, give me X million and I will give you Y billion. as sometimes it's been reported. That's a kind of crude. You can't put what you expect the tax collector to improve in tax collection into the budget. If the tax collection improves and there's more revenue, then you can put it into the budget, but not because you have a plan to start a new section within SARS. Therefore, we must put more money, more revenue into the budget. Let's see the money. A lot of this is similar to the questions about wasteful expenditure. That there's a bit of a problem because of a budget is looking to the future. It's saying, what are you going to do with the money next year? Whenever we talk about wasteful expenditure or irregular expenditure, we're talking about things that happened 2 years ago, because that's how long it takes for the audits to come through. So how do you connect those two things is a very real problem. And so you also can't budget for efficiency gains. You can't say, well, we're going to assume that we find this waste and we eliminate the corruption, and therefore we're going to have a smaller budget. Because if you do that, all you have is a smaller budget, and definitely the people who are engaging in waste and corruption are able to continue engaging waste and corruption and pass off on those losses to the service, to the beneficiaries of those services. So that's the point there, that the SARS commissioner does have a point, but it's not a budget point. It's the importance of tax administration. AI tools I have not looked at myself. I am aware that, for instance, in Brazil, their basic accounting system of government, I'm told, I haven't kind of checked out the functionality myself, but it's online. Remember, that hasn't stopped huge corruption scandals from unfolding in Brazil. So transparency is important. Maybe with AI tools, there are new opportunities there that should be explored. In general, I would say government needs to work much harder on its digital infrastructure. Before we even talk about AI, for the last 15 years, we have been unable to upgrade the basic business software of government, which is called the Integrated Financial Management System. So the payroll, the payment system, the ordering system, all of these digital tools. I mean, the Persal system was designed by a pioneering Afrikaner software engineer in the 70s. And I'm told runs on a language that nobody understands today. So we need to definitely, part of improving government is improving that digital backbone. But that will take time and will be difficult, and will only yield efficiencies and gains sometime into the future. In terms of, Peter Bruce's last argument, how long can Parliament debate the budget? I don't think there's anything to worry about now. I don't know the answer, but the PFMA allows last year's budget to continue. I think it's for 4 months. So in fact, when the IMF did a fiscal transparency review of South Africa last year, one of the problems of our budget system that they highlighted was that the budget is never passed before the beginning of the fiscal year. It's usually passed around June, and the fiscal year starts in April. And so it's normal for the budget to be passed around June. Let me just put it like that. That is what would happen in a normal year. So I don't think now in March there's any. I mean, of course, it may make Parliament's calendar a bit more truncated because we've missed these 3 weeks. But there shouldn't be any real. Parliament could go on debating it for a lot longer. Is the answer, which may not be a good thing, I suppose.
Yeah, that's all we had for you in the Q&A session. And it's been an amazing Rise Mzansi pre-budget discussion. What's key for me that keeps emerging is that South Africa actually needs leadership, that we cannot have this thing of scapegoating finance ministers and, in fact, the budget process itself. We do need to ensure that the greater government has got leadership capabilities that help us, to achieve our national goals. I think that the big issue for me is that, we say everything rises and falls on leadership. How many times have we created funding instruments to enable the growth of businesses in South Africa, yet so many funds are unallocated and inaccessible to where it matters the most, where people are ideating and need to move from ideation to a real business that is thriving. And I emphasize this thing because I did a study in one of the special economic zones where I found that domestic enterprises, even though you still want FDI, but domestic enterprises, when they grow with their domestic supply chains and potentially have a greater multiplier effect on the economy than their multinational counterparts, or some of their multinational counterparts whose supply chains may be global and in fact inaccessible to your local businesses. So it's been an amazing hour and a few minutes. And Prof, your last words?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope we do it again one day.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lulamile, Arno. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for commenting. You do know that you can share content on social media. If you really loved some of the things, share it wide. It doesn't stop when we say thank you and goodbye. We have to keep spreading the word. Thanks to Rise Mzansi for the honor of chairing this session today. It's been amazing. Thank you, Prof, for your participation. And thank you to Songa Zozibi in absentia. He had to run while we were busy. And as Haile Selassie once said, throughout history, it has been the inaction of those who should have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, and the silence of the voice of justice when it matters most that have made it possible for evil to triumph. Wherever you are, don't make it possible for evil to triumph. Cheers.